Have you ever watched someone, pushed to their absolute limit, refuse to break? Not with a shout, not with a fist, but with a silence so profound it becomes a weapon. If you have, then you know what true strength looks like. If you haven't, then you need to hear the story of Colonel Marcus Thorne. The story begins with an insult, a casual, thoughtless flick of the wrist that dismissed a lifetime of service. Drop a comment if you've ever felt invisible. Hit that like button. Because we are about to rewind to the moment it all began. Filthy, useless thing. Robert Fletcher stared at the blinking cursor on his screen, a tiny, insistent green line that pulsed with a life and urgency he himself had not felt in a decade. The cursor mocked him. It was a digital heartbeat for a system that was, in his considered opinion, already dead. Outside his plexiglass partition, the waiting room of the West Los Angeles Veterans Affairs facility hummed with the low-grade misery of a Monday morning. The air, thick with the smell of floor disinfectant and stale coffee, was a physical weight. Fletcher hated Mondays. He hated the fresh wave of need that washed in with the start of the week. He hated the faces, etched with pain or impatience, or the vacant look of men who had been waiting for years for something they could no longer name. He hated the paperwork, a mountain that never shrunk, a Sisyphean task designed by a bureaucracy that fed on its own inefficiency. He adjusted his tie, a polyester slash of navy blue that was just a little too tight, a constant petty strangulation. Then he saw him, a man standing before his desk, perfectly still. Fletcher did not look up. He had perfected the art of not looking up. Looking up was an invitation. It signaled a willingness to engage, to help, to care. Fletcher was willing to do none of those things. His job was not to care. It was to administrate, to process, to be the gatekeeper between the unending flood of demand and the shallow reservoir of supply. The man cleared his throat. It was a soft sound, a rumble of gravel that Fletcher chose to ignore. He continued typing, his fingers pecking at the keyboard with deliberate, theatrical slowness. Ends nearer, he was composing an email about the urgent need for new toner cartridges. This was a crisis he could manage. "Excuse me," the man said. The voice was deep, calm. It held no tremor of supplication, no edge of anger. It was a statement of fact. "I am here." Fletcher sighed, a long theatrical exhalation of manufactured weariness. He stopped typing, but kept his eyes locked on the cracked screen of his Dell monitor. "There's a sign-in sheet on the counter," he mumbled, gesturing vaguely with a flick of his head. "I signed in 45 minutes ago," the man replied. The same calm, the same unnerving patience. "The nurse said I needed to speak with an administrator to get a triage appointment scheduled. You people always need something special." Fletcher thought. The phrase "you people" was a comfortable, well-worn groove in his mind. It was a catch-all for anyone who did not look like him, sound like him, or share his particular brand of weary entitlement. He finally, grudgingly, lifted his eyes. The man was black, maybe 50, with close-cropped hair just beginning to gray at the temples. He was dressed in simple, clean civilian clothes, jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and worn-in work boots. But it was his posture that registered first. He stood with a ramrod straightness that seemed at odds with his casual attire, a stillness that was not passive but coiled. His hands were clasped loosely behind his back. There was a story in that stance, a history of discipline and command, but it was a language Fletcher had no interest in learning. All he saw was another problem, another number seeking to drain the system. "And what's the issue?" Fletcher asked, his tone dripping with the condescension of a petty god in a small kingdom. Persistent cough. For about 3 months. Getting worse, the man stated. He did not elaborate. He did not perform his pain. He presented the facts. Fletcher swiveled his chair a quarter turn, and made a show of clicking through a digital calendar on his screen. The calendar was mostly empty. It was a lie, but it was a useful one. "We are booked solid," he declared, the words tasting like victory. Completely overwhelmed. "We might have an opening for a new patient intake next week." "Maybe I'm not a new patient," the man said, his voice still level. "My records are in the system." Colonel Marcus Thorne. Fletcher's fingers paused over the keyboard. "Colonel," the title gave him a moment's pause. A flicker of something that might have been respect if it had not been so quickly smothered by resentment. So he had been an officer. That just made it worse. It made him one of them, one of the brass who sat in safe rooms while other men bled. And now he wanted to jump the line. He typed the name, Thorne. The system churned for a moment, then a file appeared. Fletcher scanned it with practiced disinterest. He saw the commendations, the service record spanning 3 decades, the deployments to places he only knew from the news. He saw the notes from previous checkups, years old, all routine. He saw nothing that screamed emergency, nothing that would force his hand. "Right?" Fletcher said, turning back. Colonel, like I said, the system is overwhelmed. A cough isn't a priority 1 emergency. You can call the scheduling line in the morning, or you can come back next week and try your luck then." He offered a thin, dismissive smile. It was the smile of a man who enjoyed saying no. It was the only real power he had. For the first time, Marcus Thorne's composure seemed to shift. It was not a crack, but a subtle hardening. His eyes, which had been patient, now became analytical. He was not looking at Fletcher anymore. He was looking at the chaos on Fletcher's desk. The precarious stacks of files flagged with different colored sticky notes, a system so arcane only one man could understand it, ensuring his own job security. He saw the overflowing inbox on the screen, a cascade of unread emails marked with red exclamation points of false urgency. He saw the logic of failure. A system designed not to serve, but to obstruct. He was not a patient anymore, he was a diagnostician. The machine was telling him what was wrong. "I see," Thorne said. It was all he said. 2 words. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not flash his credentials or demand to see a supervisor. He simply absorbed the dismissal, the casual cruelty of it. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not agreement. Then he turned and walked away. His back remained perfectly straight. His steps were measured, unhurried. Nine-Seal Fletcher watched him go, a smirk playing on his lips. He had won. He had held the line. He had protected his little kingdom from one more interloper. He returned to his email about the toner cartridges, the blinking green cursor no longer mocking him. It was obedient. He was in control. He pushed the thought of the colonel from his mind. Just another face in the crowd. He would forget him in 5 minutes. It was a profound miscalculation. As Marcus Thorne stepped out of the stale, recycled air of the VA facility and into the hazy California sun, he did not feel anger. Anger was a hot, useless emotion. It clouded judgment. What he felt was a cold, clear certainty. A diagnosis. The system was not just broken, it was diseased. The infection was not in the funding or the policies written in Washington. It was here, in the small, petty tyrannies of men like Robert Fletcher. It was in the air, in the architecture of the place, in the quiet despair of the men waiting. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around a small rectangular piece of metal. It was a Zippo lighter, its silver plating worn smooth and thin at the edges, the hinge loose from decades of being opened and closed. It was empty. It hadn't held fluid in years, but it was not for making fire. It was for remembering. Usadedin. The memory came to him then, as clear and sharp as the scent of gasoline and motor oil in his father's garage. He was 12 years old, a skinny kid with hands too small for the wrenches his father tried to teach him to use. The garage was Al Thorne's sanctuary, a cathedral of organized chaos. Tools hung from pegboards in perfect logical order. Jars of screws and bolts were labeled with his father's neat, blocky handwriting. In the center of it all, the hulking metal beast of a V8 engine, hoisted on a chain, its metallic guts exposed to the world. His father, Al, was a big man with hands calloused into leather pads, yet he moved with a surprising grace. He was a master mechanic, but he thought like a philosopher. He was trying to explain the firing order of the cylinders to Marcus, but the boy's mind was wandering. "You're not listening, son," Al said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He didn't sound angry, just disappointed. He wiped his hands on a greasy red rag. "You're looking, but you're not listening. It's just a bunch of parts," Dad Marcus mumbled, kicking at a loose bolt on the concrete floor. Al smiled. He reached into the pocket of his greasy overalls and pulled out the Zippo lighter. He flicked it open with a practiced snap of his wrist and a familiar click-clack. He spun the flint wheel. "Nothing," he tried again. "Nothing. See this?" he said, holding it out. "It's broken. Now, a fool gets mad at it, kicks it, throws it against the wall. A smart man asks, why? It's simple. Flint, steel, fuel, 3 parts. When it stops working, it's not magic. It's not a mystery. One of those 3 things is wrong, or the connection between them is. Your job ain't to get mad. Your job is to find the broken part." He handed the lighter to Marcus. "The machine tells you what's wrong. Always. An engine, a clock, anything. It sputters. It leaks. It makes a sound it's not supposed to make. Those are its words. It's telling you its story. You don't look at a car, you listen to it. Logic never lies." Marcus spent the next hour taking the Zippo apart, cleaning the flint wheel with a tiny brush, checking the wick, discovering the cotton batting inside was bone dry. Fuel. The problem was fuel. He filled it from a small can, reassembled it, and with a nervous thumb, flicked the wheel. A perfect steady flame bloomed in the dim light of the garage. Next, the look on his father's face was not just pride, it was understanding. He had passed on the key. Not the key to fixing cars, but the key to seeing the world. Systems, logic, diagnosis. "That's it, son," Al said, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. "That's all life is. Find the broken part. The rest is just noise." His father had died 10 years ago, but the lesson and the lighter remained. Throughout his military career, Marcus Thorne had not been a warrior in the traditional sense. He had been a logistician, a strategist. He commanded supply chains, not battalions. He fought wars on spreadsheets and flowcharts. He looked at the vast complex machine of the US Army, and he listened to it. He heard the sputters, the leaks, the sounds it wasn't supposed to make. He found the broken parts, the inefficient shipping routes, the redundant supply depots, the flawed procurement protocols, and he fixed them. He saved billions of dollars and, more importantly, he saved lives by ensuring that soldiers on the front lines had the fuel, the ammunition, the medical supplies they needed. Exactly when they needed them. He listened to the machine. Expert now, standing in a parking lot under a pale sun, he was listening to a new machine. And it was screaming. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his other hand still wrapped around the cool metal of the Zippo. The caller ID read XSN, Davis's. He answered. "Thorne, it's Dan Marcus," the voice on the other end said, warm and booming. It was Senator Davis of the Armed Services Committee, the man who had championed his nomination from the very beginning. The final vote came through 10 minutes ago. Unanimous. "Congratulations, Mr. Secretary." Marcus Thorne, standing in the parking lot of a facility that had just refused him care. stood a little straighter, the world tilted on its axis. The title was no longer a memory from his service record. It was a reality. Secretary of Veterans Affairs. "Thank you, Senator," Thorne said, his voice as calm as ever. "Your transition team is waiting for your call. They've got the office prepped, press conference scheduled for tomorrow morning. The president wants to do a joint appearance," the senator rattled on. "But the office is yours, effective immediately." "So, what's your first move, Mr. Secretary? A quiet day to get your bearings?" Marcus Thorne looked back at the squat, soulless building. He saw the smudged glass doors. He saw the flag, flying limply from its pole. He heard the ghost of his father's voice. "Find the broken part." "No, Senator," Thorne said. "I'm already at the office, the real one. I think I'll start here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Marcus, what are you talking about? Where are you?" "West L, AVA Medical Center," Thorne replied. "I came for a checkup. And I believe I've just completed my first diagnostic. 50 minutes. It took 50 minutes. In that time, Marcus Thorne made 2 phone calls. The first was to his new chief of staff, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria Flores he had worked with at the Pentagon. The second was to the head of the Federal Protective Service Detachment assigned to his office. His instructions were simple, precise, and non-negotiable. When the black Chevrolet Suburban, followed by 2 black sedans, pulled silently into the parking lot, they did not park in the visitor spaces. They pulled directly up to the curb in the red zone in front of the main entrance, their tinted windows reflecting the unimpressive facade of the building. 6 people got out. 2 were uniformed federal officers, their jackets emblazoned with the department seal. 3 were his senior transition staff, including Maria Flores, all clutching iPads and looking grimly efficient. The 6th was Colonel, now Secretary, Marcus Thorne. He had not changed his clothes. The security guard at the door, a man named Henderson, who had watched Thorne leave not an hour before with a look of weary pity, saw the entourage approaching. His eyes widened. He saw Thorne, the same man in the same grey t-shirt, now flanked by federal agents. Henderson fumbled with his radio, his mind struggling to reconcile the 2 images. He instinctively moved to block the door. "Sir, this is a restricted entrance for." The lead federal officer did not break stride. He simply flashed his credentials. "We're with Secretary Thorne." Henderson's brain short-circuited. He looked from the badge to Thorne's impassive face and back again. The name. Thorne. He had had it just an hour ago, at the administrator's desk. Colonel Thorne. He stepped aside as if pushed by an invisible force, his mouth hanging slightly open. The group strode into the lobby. The atmosphere changed instantly. The low hum of misery was pierced by a new frequency: authority. People in the waiting room looked up from their phones, their magazines. The nurses at the front desk stopped their conversations mid-sentence. The air crackled. This was not the slow grinding power of the VA bureaucracy. This was something else entirely. Fast, sharp, unstoppable, none. They didn't stop at the sign-in sheet. They walked directly toward the plexiglass kingdom of Robert Fletcher. Fletcher was just finishing his email. He had achieved a small, perfect paragraph detailing the precise specifications of the required toner cartridges. He was about to hit send when a shadow fell over his desk. Not one shadow, a cluster of them. He looked up, annoyance pinching his features, and he froze. It was him, the colonel, the man he had dismissed. But he was not alone. He was surrounded by people in dark suits and police uniforms. Fletcher's mind scrambled for an explanation. Had the man filed a complaint? Called the police? It was absurd. "Can I help you?" Fletcher asked, his voice a little shakier than he would have liked. Marcus Thorne did not answer. He looked past Fletcher, his eyes doing a clinical sweep of the office behind the partition. He gestured with his chin toward the supervisor's office, a slightly larger glass box in the corner. "Who is the facility director on duty?" he asked, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute command. Fletcher's training kicked in. "Deflect, obfuscate. Mr. Davis is in a meeting," he lied. "You'll have to make an appointment." Thorne's chief of staff, Maria Flores, stepped forward, her eyes like chips of ice. "Mr. Fletcher, you will either get your supervisor out here in the next 10 seconds, or these officers will escort you to a place where you can consider the consequences of obstructing a federal cabinet secretary in the performance of his duties." Secretary, the word hit Robert Fletcher like a physical blow. It sucked the air from his lungs. Secretary, he stared at Thorne, at the plain grey t-shirt, the worn jeans. It was impossible. It was a joke, a nightmare. His eyes darted around, looking for a camera, for some sign that this was an elaborate prank. He found only the cold, serious faces of the federal officers. He scrambled from his chair, his knee banging painfully against the underside of his desk. He scurried to the supervisor's door and knocked frantically. Sestant a moment later, a portly man in a rumpled suit, Mr. Davis, emerged, looking annoyed. "What is it, Robert?" "I'm on a call." His annoyance evaporated when he saw the crowd gathered around his subordinate's desk. He saw the uniforms. He saw the severe-looking woman with the iPad. And he saw Marcus Thorne, standing at the center of it all, a point of absolute stillness in the swirling chaos. "Can I help you?" Davis asked, trying to project an authority he did not feel. It was Thorne who answered. He took a step forward. "Mr. Davis, I am Marcus Thorne. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I am the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and this is my first facility inspection." Davis's face went slack, the color draining from it until it was the color of old parchment. He looked at Thorne, then at Fletcher, a dawning horror in his eyes. He understood. He understood immediately and completely. "Mr. Secretary," Davis stammered. We had no idea." Welcome to, please, my office." Thorne ignored the invitation. His focus was a laser beam, and it was pointed directly at Robert Fletcher, who was trying to shrink to become invisible behind his desk. "Mr. Fletcher," Thorne began, his voice still low, still devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a man reading a damage report. "An hour ago, I presented to your desk with a persistent 3-month cough. I gave you my name and my service record. You informed me that the system was overwhelmed and that I should come back next week. Is that an accurate summary of our interaction?" Fletcher's throat was dry. He swallowed, and it sounded like sandpaper. There must be a misunderstanding, Sir Secretary. I was following protocol." "Whose protocol?" Thorne's question was a scalpel. "Show it to me. Show me the written protocol that directs you to turn away a veteran with a 3-month respiratory issue without a triage assessment. Show me the protocol that allows you to make a medical judgment based on your personal assessment of the calendar." "Well, it's not. It's an unwritten, it's a matter of discretion." Fletcher stammered, his eyes darting to Davis for help. But Davis was staring at the floor, his face a mask of doom. "Discretion," Thorne repeated the word, letting it hang in the air. "Let's talk about your discretionary data." Maria, his chief of staff, stepped forward, her iPad already glowing. "Sir, Mr. Fletcher's station has processed an average of 4.7 patient interactions per hour this morning. Other administrative stations are averaging 11.2. His appointment scheduling queue has a 92% rejection rate for same-day requests, compared to a facility average of 58%. Over the past 6 months, formal complaints filed against this facility have named Mr. Fletcher specifically in 67% of all cases, despite him being one of 6 administrators. The numbers landed like hammer blows in the silent room. They were cold, hard, and irrefutable. Logic never lies. The machine was telling its story. Fletcher stared at the iPad, at the charts and graphs that laid his career bare, that stripped away all his excuses and exposed the rotten core of his work ethic. It was all there. The indolence, the obstruction, the petty cruelty quantified and displayed in high resolution. This is an ambush, he whispered, a desperate, pathetic defiance flickering in his eyes. You came in here with a chip on your shoulder because I didn't kiss your ring before I knew who you were. It was a fatal error. He had just accused a cabinet secretary of retaliatory action. He had given his malice a voice. Thorne's expression did not change. He simply turned to Davies. Mr. Davies, you are the director of this facility. You are responsible for the performance of your staff and the care of the veterans in this district. The data suggests you have allowed this inefficiency to persist for at least 6 months. You have failed in your primary duty. As of this moment, you are on administrative leave pending a full investigation by the Inspector General's office. A new interim director will be here by morning. Your credentials and access are revoked. Please escort yourself from the building. Davies looked as if he had been shot. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to say. He nodded numbly, turned, and walked toward his office to collect his things. A dead man walking. Thorne's gaze then returned to Robert Fletcher, who was now visibly trembling. "Scient as for you, Mr. Fletcher," Thorne said, his voice dropping even lower. "You are not just inefficient. You are a broken part. You are a blockage in the system. You are the reason men who serve this country lose faith in its promises. You are the reason a cough becomes pneumonia, and pneumonia becomes something worse. You are not just fired. Your actions and the potential medical consequences of your discretion will be the subject of that same investigation. You will turn over your credentials and any government property to this officer. You have 10 minutes to clear your desk." Thorne gestured to one of the federal officers, who stepped forward and stood impassively next to Fletcher's chair. Fletcher stared at Thorne, his face a contorted mask of hatred, fear, and disbelief. He saw no anger in Thorne's eyes, no satisfaction, no triumph. He saw only a cold, dispassionate logic, the look of a mechanic who had found the faulty component and was preparing to discard it. It was this absence of emotion that was the most profound insult of all. He was not being punished, he was being replaced, like a worn-out spark plug. But in that moment of absolute ruin, a desperate, venomous cunning sparked in Robert Fletcher's mind. He was ruined. He knew it. But he would not go down alone. He would pull this man, this secretary, down into the mud with him. He would make him pay for this humiliation. As he began to robotically place the contents of his desk into a small cardboard box, a plan began to form. A nasty, brilliant, and utterly false narrative. He would not be the villain of this story. He would be the victim. And Secretary Marcus Thorne would be the corrupt tyrant who abused his newfound power on his very first day. The system he had served for 20 years, by obstructing it, would now serve him one last time. He would leak his story. He would twist the facts. He would lie. And in the court of public opinion, a lie told first and loudest often wins. 2 days later, the headline hit the internet like a flash grenade. It was on the homepage of a major cable news network. Bold and damning, new VA secretary in abuse of power scandal on day one. The article, written by a journalist known for his contrarian and often inflammatory takes, was a masterwork of insinuation and selective framing. It told the story not from the perspective of a veteran denied care, but from the perspective of a dedicated, lifelong public servant named Robert Fletcher. In Fletcher's telling, a man had come into his office demanding an immediate non-emergency appointment and becoming belligerent when denied. He claimed the man Thorne had hinted at knowing people and threatened to have his job. Then, in a shocking abuse of power, this same man returned an hour later, now revealed as the new VA secretary, with a squad of federal agents, and summarily fired Fletcher and his boss in a fit of personal pique. The article quoted an anonymous source inside the facility, Fletcher's now unemployed boss, Davies, who confirmed the retaliatory nature of the firings. It painted Thorne as a thin-skinned, arrogant official using the immense power of his office to settle a petty personal score. It never once mentioned Thorne's 3-month cough. It never quoted the performance data. The story was a lie, but it was a compelling one. The firestorm was immediate and intense. #hashtags trended, #Swamp King, #VA Power Trip. Comment sections became a cesspool of outrage. Thorne's picture, a stern-faced official photo from his military days, was turned into a meme, captioned with slogans of entitled tyranny. The narrative was set. The new man, sent to drain the swamp, had become the biggest creature in it on his very first day. The pressure on the White House was immense. The optics were catastrophic. The president's political opponents seized on the story as proof of a corrupt and incompetent administration. By noon, the call came. It was not from the president, but from his chief of staff, a man whose job was to cauterize political wounds. The conversation was short and brutal. Thorne was not fired, but he was asked to step aside, to take a leave of absence pending the outcome of a formal inquiry by the Office of the Inspector General. It was a public crucifixion. He was to be investigated for abusing the very power he had been given to help people. He agreed without argument. Arguing would be seen as further proof of his arrogance. He knew the system. He knew how the logic of politics worked. He had to submit to the process. That afternoon, Marcus Thorne walked out of the main entrance of the Department of Veterans Affairs headquarters in Washington, D.C. He was alone. The federal escort was gone. He walked past a throng of reporters shouting questions, their cameras flashing like strobes. Extant, he did not look at them. He kept his eyes forward, his back straight, his face a mask of impenetrable calm. He got into a waiting taxi and was driven away, a general in forced exile. In his pocket, his hand was wrapped tightly around the cool, smooth metal of his father's Zippo. He was isolated. Disgraced, the machine of public opinion had turned on him, fueled by Fletcher's lies. He was, for all intents and purposes, finished. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have raged? Despaired? For Marcus Thorne, there was only one path forward, the same path his father had taught him in a greasy garage years ago. Find the broken part. The lie was the broken part, and all he needed was the data to prove it. At the West LA VA facility, life had returned to a semblance of normal, but the air was thick with a new kind of tension. Fletcher and Davies were gone, but their ghosts remained. The interim director was a humorless bureaucrat from downtown who kept to his office, and at a small desk in the corner of the administrative pool, a young clerk named Elliot Barnes tried to make himself invisible. Elliot was quiet, observant, and possessed a deeply ingrained, almost painful sense of right and wrong. He had been there. He had seen the whole thing. He had seen Colonel Thorne's quiet dignity in the face of Fletcher's sneering contempt. He had seen the cold fury in Fletcher's eyes after he was fired. And he had had the conversation. He had been staying late to catch up on a backlog of filing, a backlog created almost single-handedly by Fletcher's indolence. Fletcher and Davies, thinking they were alone, had huddled near the water cooler. Elliot, hidden behind a tall stack of file cabinets, had heard every word. He heard Fletcher lay out his plan, his voice dripping with venomous glee. "I'll say he threatened me," Fletcher had hissed. "I'll say he tried to bribe me. I'm going to bury him. I'll leak it myself. By the time they figure out what's what, his career will be tossed. Elliot had also seen Fletcher at his computer later that night, long after everyone else had gone home. He'd seen him logged into the patient scheduling system. He didn't know exactly what Fletcher was doing, but he knew it wasn't right. The man's posture was that of a thief, hunched over, his eyes darting around the empty office. For 2 days, Elliot had done nothing. Fear was a powerful paralytic. He was a junior clerk on a probationary contract. Fletcher might be gone, but the system that produced him was still in place. Getting involved meant risking his job, his future, but the news stories, the vilification of a man he knew to be honorable, ate at him. It was a noise in the system, a sound that wasn't right. That night, he made a decision. He couldn't go to the Inspector General. They were investigating Thorne, not Fletcher. He couldn't go to the press. Who would believe a lowly clerk over a seasoned administrator with a sympathetic story? He could only go to one person. Working late again, his heart pounding in his chest, Elliot accessed the system's server logs. He was not a hacker, but he knew his way around the back end of the scheduling software. He found what he was looking for, the system's immutable audit trail. It was a log that recorded every single keystroke, every change, stamped with a date, time, and user ID. He found the record of Fletcher's activity from that night. He saw the new patient appointment record Fletcher had created for Marcus Thorne, backdated to the morning of the incident. He saw the notes Fletcher had added. Patient became verbally abusive after being told of standard wait times. Demanded preferential treatment. A complete fabrication. Then, Elliot did something brave. He pulled the server logs from the hour before Fletcher's late-night session. The original, unmodified logs. They showed what he knew to be true. No appointment had been made for Thorne. No notes entered. There was only the record of Fletcher looking up Thorne's file and then closing it. It was the digital smoking gun. The lie captured in lines of code. N0. He attached the 2 log files, the original and the doctored one, to a new email. He found Secretary Thorne's personal, non-governmental email address from a news article about his nomination. He typed a single sentence in the body of the message. Logic never lies. A concerned employee. He sent it from an anonymous, encrypted email account and immediately deleted the history. It was a flare shot in the dark, a prayer sent into the digital void. Marcus Thorne sat in the Spartan study of his temporary DC. Apartment, for days he had been working, not pacing, not raging, not calling in favors. Working, he had his old cracked personal laptop open on a simple folding table. The laptop, a relic from his early military days, was another symbolic object, a tool he trusted over any sleek new government-issued machine. It was his. He was building a case, a presentation. He was mapping out the logic of the situation, the timeline of events, the character of the players involved. He was preparing for the hearing he knew would come. A battle he would have to fight with reason and evidence, not power. Then, the email arrived. Ensneer, he saw the anonymous sender, the cryptic subject line. He almost deleted it. But the message, logic never lies. It was his father's phrase, a piece of his own soul sent back to him from an unknown ally. He opened the attachments. His eyes scanned the first log file, then the second. A slow, cold smile touched his lips for the first time in days. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a mechanic who had just heard the telltale rattle in the engine, the sound that told him exactly where the brake was. Fuel, Flint, Still Fletcher had created a false narrative. That was the fuel. The media had provided the steel, the spark to ignite it. But the flint, the core truth, was flawed. And Marcus Thorne now had the proof. The hearing was convened in a wood-paneled room on Capitol Hill, a place that reeked of old power and self-importance. It was not a trial, but a formal inquiry by the Congressional Oversight Committee. The atmosphere was somber and prosecutorial. The committee members sat on a raised dais, looking down. The press was there, a pack of wolves sensing blood. Robert Fletcher was there, seated at a polished table with his lawyer. He looked confident, almost smug. He was dressed in a new suit, his face a mask of earnest sincerity. He was the star witness, the victim. He had spent the morning giving a tearful, compelling account of his ordeal, of the terrifying moment a powerful man decided to destroy my life over a perceived slight. Then it was Thorne's turn. He walked to the table alone, no lawyer. He wore a simple, dark suit, but he carried himself with the same ramrod stillness he'd had in the VA waiting room. He placed his old, cracked laptop on the table and connected it to the room's projector. "Mr. Secretary," the committee chairman began, his voice heavy with disapproval. "You have heard the testimony of Mr. Fletcher. You have read the reports. The evidence against you is substantial. This committee would like to hear your response." Thorne did not look at the chairman. He looked at the screen projected behind him. "My response is a diagnostic," he said, his voice calm and clear, filling the silent room. Next, the first slide appeared. It was a simple timeline. 9:15 am, Thorne arrives at West LA VA. 9:55 am, Thorne is denied an appointment by Fletcher. 10:45 am, Thorne returns as secretary. 11:10 am, Fletcher and Davies are placed on leave. "These are the undisputed facts," Thorne said. "Now, let us examine the narrative. Mr. Fletcher alleges that my actions at 10:45 were retaliation for the events at 9:55. He claims I was a belligerent man who became a vengeful official. This is his story. Now let's listen to the machine's story." The next slide showed the performance data Maria Flores had presented. The 4.7 interactions per hour. The 92% rejection rate. The 67% of formal complaints. This data, pulled from the VA's own servers, shows a clear pattern of dereliction of duty on the part of Mr. Fletcher, predating my arrival by months, if not years. My decision to place him on leave was not personal. It was based on this. It was a simple, logical response to a failing component. Fletcher shifted in his seat, his lawyer whispering in his ear. This was not what they had expected. But, Thorne continued, Mr. Fletcher has made a specific falsifiable claim. He has stated, under oath, that he created a record of our interaction that morning, noting my alleged belligerence. He submitted a screenshot of this record to the Inspector General. The next slide showed Fletcher's fabricated screenshot. The backdated appointment, the slanderous notes. This is Mr. Fletcher's key evidence, Thorne said. This is the foundation of his entire story. And it is a lie. He clicked to the next slide. It showed the two server logs, side by side. On the left, the log from 10:0 am, showing only that Fletcher had accessed Thorne's file. On the right, the log from 11:30 p.m., showing Fletcher creating the appointment and adding the notes. The timestamps were highlighted in red. This, Thorne said, pointing to the screen, is the system's immutable audit trail. It cannot be altered. It cannot be faked. It shows, definitively, that Mr. Fletcher did not create this record during our interaction. He created it nearly 14 hours later, in the dead of night, after he had been fired. He did not document an event. He fabricated one to support a false narrative he intended to leak to the press. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The press gallery was suddenly buzzing. Fletcher's face had gone the color of ash. He stared at the screen, at the lines of code that were a digital confession, and his smug confidence shattered into a million pieces. He didn't just lie to the press, Thorne continued, his voice like chipping ice. He falsified a federal record. He presented that falsified record to the Inspector General. He committed perjury before this committee. He did not do this because he was a victim. He did this because he was caught. Thorne advanced to his final slide. It was a blank white screen with 5 black words. Logic never lies. He turned off the projector. The room was plunged into a stunned, profound silence. And all eyes were on Robert Fletcher. The chairman stared down from the dais, his face a thundercloud. He looked at Fletcher, then at the evidence, then back at Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Is there anything you would like to say in response to this data?" Fletcher opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at his lawyer, who was staring down at his legal pad as if it held the secrets to the universe, refusing to make eye contact. Fletcher's carefully constructed world had just been dismantled, piece by piece, by pure, undeniable fact. It's taken out of context," he finally stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "The logs they can be manipulated. It was a weak, final lie, and everyone in the room knew it." The chairman slammed his gavel down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "That is enough. This committee finds the evidence presented by Secretary Thorne to be clear, compelling, and irrefutable. We find that Mr. Robert Fletcher has willfully misled this committee, perjured himself under oath, and attempted to perpetrate a fraud upon this government. I am referring this entire matter to the Department of Justice for immediate criminal prosecution." He then looked to the back of the room, where 2 U.S. Marshals stood watching. "Marshals, take this man into custody." Fletcher's face collapsed. The last vestiges of his defiance crumbled into pure animal terror. "No," he whispered. "No, you can't." The Marshals moved forward, their steps measured and implacable. They flanked him, and one placed a firm hand on his shoulder. He was pulled to his feet. As they escorted him from the room, past the flashing cameras of the press who had once been his allies, his exit was a perfect damning mirror of Marcus Thorne's own public disgrace. He was not a victim. He was not a whistleblower. He was just a broken part, being removed from the machine. The next day, the headlines were different. VA Secretary exonerated. Fletcher charged with perjury. The President of the United States held a press conference in the Rose Garden, with Marcus Thorne standing at his side. He offered a full-throated, unequivocal statement of support and publicly apologized for the rush to judgment. Marcus Thorne was not just reinstated. He was elevated. He walked back into the Department of Veterans Affairs, not as a new appointee, but as a legend. A man who had faced down the swamp, been swallowed by it, and emerged not just unscathed, but stronger. He now had more than power. He had moral authority, and he intended to use it. 6 months later, the West LA VA facility was unrecognizable. The dingy waiting room had been redesigned. It was bright, open, and efficient. The plexiglass partitions were gone, replaced with open, welcoming desks. The sign-in process was now handled by a simple, intuitive tablet system. The average wait time for a triage assessment was down from 2 hours to 15 minutes. At the center of the new administrative hub sat Elliot Burns. After the hearing, Thorne had found him. He hadn't needed to search hard. He had simply asked his new team to find the most competent, morally upright junior employee in the West LA office. All signs pointed to the quiet clerk who always stayed late. Thorne had promoted him, mentored him, and given him the resources to help redesign the very system that had once oppressed him. Thorne stood watching him for a moment. Elliot was patiently explaining the new system to an elderly veteran, his voice kind and clear. He was listening. That afternoon, Thorne formally announced his new signature program. It was not another layer of bureaucracy. It was a training academy. A new school for VA administrators and leaders, designed to teach them the principles of systems analysis, patient-first logic, and ethical governance. He named it the Al Thorne Diagnostic Initiative. In the lobby of the VA headquarters in Washington, D.C., a new display case had been installed. It was sleek, modern, and spotlit. Most tourists and employees walked past it without a second glance. But for those who stopped to look, they would not see a medal, a flag, or a portrait. They would see a single, humble object resting on a bed of black velvet. It was an old Zippo lighter, its silver plating worn smooth at the corners. A small brass plaque beneath it read, "Logic never lies." A system cannot lie about its problems. Our duty is to listen. The final scene of that chapter of his life took place back where it started. Thorne was visiting the transformed LA facility. He found Elliot at the end of a long day, tidying his perfectly organized desk. "Good work today, Elliot," Thorne said. "Thank you, Mr. Secretary." Just following the process, Elliot replied with a small, proud smile. Thorne reached into his pocket and placed a small object on the desk. It was a Zippo lighter, not his father's, but a new one, clean and polished, its surface an unblemished silver mirror. Elliot looked at it, confused. "It's simple," Thorne said, his voice a low rumble, echoing his father's from so many years ago. "Flint, steel, fuel. When the system stops working, don't get mad. Listen, it will tell you what's wrong. It will tell you its story." He placed a hand on Elliot's shoulder, the same way his own father had done. He was not just passing on an object, he was passing on a legacy. A way of seeing, a promise that no matter how broken a system becomes, there are always people willing to listen, to diagnose, and to fix it. The work was not done. It would never be done. But for the first time in a long time, the machine was beginning to run smoothly. Hopeful, inspirational orchestral score swells and then fades to a close.